Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Jamara Davis Welch, and I'm back to share some more insights from my new book, High Value, The Prayer of a Queen. As a recap, in our previous discussions, we've talked about how Esther prepared for prayer through fasting, how she approached God with reverence, confessed ancestral sins, as well as her raw honesty about her position. Today, I want to look at something that might challenge what you've been taught about praying for your enemies. This most likely will be a topic that you may need to wrestle with. It's going to be a tough one. You see, when we look at what Esther actually prayed for concerning Haman, who was actively trying to destroy her people, her prayer wasn't what many of us have been taught about praying for our enemies, where we're taught that praying for our enemies always means to ask God to bless or to bring good things to those who have wronged us. Let me share her exact words from her prayer, which I have up here on my screen. She said, "O Lord, do not resign thy scepter to them that are not, and let them not laugh at our fall, but turn their counsel against themselves, and make an example of him who has begun to injure us. Remember us, O Lord, manifest thyself in the time of our affliction, and encourage me, O King of gods and ruler of all dominion. Put harmonious speech into my mouth before the lion, and turn his heart to hate him that fights against us to the utter destruction of him and of them that consent with him. But deliver us by thine hand, and help me who am destitute and have none but thee, O Lord." Now let's break down what she specifically asked God for. Number one, she asked God to turn their counsel against themselves and to make an example of him who has begun to injure us. Secondly, she requested God to manifest himself and to encourage her during this time of affliction, which we'll discuss in upcoming videos when we talk about overcoming fear. Thirdly, she asked for harmonious speech before the king, whom she referred to as the lion. Fourth, she prayed for the king's heart to be turned against her enemy, even to the point of their utter destruction. And finally, she asked for divine deliverance, which we'll also explore in future videos. Now, before I go any further, the question must be asked. What part of her prayer was for the good, the salvation, or God's mercy, if you will, for her enemy? Let that sink in. Not a single word, not one request for mercy. Now let me keep going by discussing how God answered her request. First, regarding her request for harmonious speech and the king's heart to be turned, when she approached the king uninvited, which could have meant her death, by the way, even though she was his wife, God changed his heart from anger to gentleness. When she finally revealed her request about her people, God gave her exactly the right words at the right time. The king's heart was so completely turned that he not only listened with favor, but he acted decisively against her enemy. Then look at how God answered her prayer to turn their counsel against themselves. Haman had made arrangements to have Mordecai hung on gallows 50 cubits high. That very counsel was turned against him. Not only was Haman hung on those same gallows, but his sons were executed too. Further, Haman's own house, his land, and all of his property, even his high-ranking position, was given to who? To Mordecai. What perfect justice. Each part of Esther's prayer was answered exactly as she had asked, though perhaps in ways that she couldn't have imagined. And you know what? Esther isn't the only biblical figure who's prayed like this. If you're thinking that Esther's approach was unique, let me share something with you. I want you to think about Moses and his prayer for God's judgment on Pharaoh. Look at Nehemiah praying for God to turn his enemies' reproach on their own heads. And my favorite, King David, his prayers, a man after God's own heart. In Psalm 109, he specifically asked God to, quote, "Let his days be few and let another take his office. Let his enemies' children be fatherless and his wife a widow, and let his children be continually vagabonds and beg." David said that? Oh, yes. I could go on, but you can read his prayer for yourself. Even Jeremiah, known as the weeping prophet, he prayed for God's justice against his persecutors. You see, while God is absolutely a God of mercy, he is also a God of justice. These biblical examples show us something crucial, that when someone has wronged you, it is perfectly acceptable to ask God to work on your behalf and to execute his justice, his vengeance, if you will. I know it's strong language, but we don't have to sugarcoat it. If somebody has done evil against you or God's people, you can take that to God and ask him to deal with it. It's okay. So here's what we need to understand. The key is understanding that praying about our enemies means seeking God's wisdom about how to pray, meaning what to ask him for, rather than automatically assuming we need to pray for their blessing. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, but doesn't Yeshua, aka Jesus, tell us to love our enemies and to pray for those who persecute us? Yes, he absolutely does. And there's definitely a place for that kind of prayer. But here's what's crucial to understand. We see throughout Scripture that God's people could both show love to enemies and pray for God's justice when faced with evil. Again, look at David. He showed mercy to Saul multiple times, yet he also prayed for God's judgment on others who were truly working evil against himself as well as God's people. Again, I have to emphasize, the key is seeking God's wisdom about how to pray in each situation, even when dealing with our enemies. Sometimes love means praying for someone's transformation. Other times, love means praying for protection and justice against those who would harm us. This isn't about unforgiveness. It's about trusting God to execute justice in his way and in his time, and knowing that it is permissible to ask him for justice. Next time, we're going to look at another powerful aspect of Esther's prayer, and that is her request for God to deliver her from her fear. But for now, I want you to think about what was just discussed. How does this change, if at all, your understanding of praying about or for your enemies? Have you ever sought God's guidance on how to pray when dealing with someone who clearly meant your harm? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And as a reminder, my book is available on Amazon and Google Play. With that, salama and barakah, in other words, peace and blessings.